Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we call the work session to order. And we have the agenda in front of us. Are there additions or corrections?
Nope, the agenda's good the way it is. I will note, we're not gonna have general government today because we've got a OSS review from 2024 election scheduled at 10:30.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I don't think we normally
We
do
do.
motions at the work session.
I can't recall.
It doesn't matter either way.
Okay, what would you prefer?
It does not matter to me. We can just be informal and move forward.
We typically don't have motions at the work session on items, but the agenda. So the first item is relatively simple. It is updating language in our bylaws to include the rules about remote meetings in our this came up in January when Commissioner Karen and I were in St. Paul at a training, and it basically is just a copy and a paste of recommendation from MCIT that we be specific about this so that we're clear with the public and we're clear with each other, and then we know which rules we're supposed to have if somebody's attending remotely. And the biggest one that is here is explicitly, even though the first requirement is that everybody be able to be seen and be heard from either side of the platform, that the requirement is still for the roll call vote. And it seems to me that that's a carryover from the days when we had telephone meetings, because you couldn't see that somebody would raise their hand, or you couldn't hear them because the technology wasn't there. But until the rule is updated to catch up with the technology, the requirement is that we have a roll call vote anytime we have somebody participating remotely. We've been doing all the other stuff, the notices, the posting of the address, and like I've heard several people comment that when they retire, their plan is to just go around to open meetings and sit in people's winter homes and sit in meetings with them. I don't know how practical that is, but it's kind of people taking a poke at this. So this is relatively, unless anybody has any questions, we'll put this on as an update for action next week.
This applies to all meetings then that we do?
It applies to all meetings that the open meeting law applies to. So that is all local governments and any committee or subcommittee that they have granted authority to, not committee, but body that they have granted authority to. So if a committee meets and has authority to do something for themselves, then yes, they should be doing that. Our standing committees don't, because they're not public, because we don't have a quorum there, and we haven't designated them authority to do anything other than discuss and recommend. But one that comes up is Heritage. Heritage, we routinely bring people in by telephone, and that does not meet, this is ours.
Yeah.
But we may want to have this conversation with the Heritage Board that I believe that this would apply to them as well.
And I know MCIT, I just got the newsletter yesterday, as a matter of fact, and they've got a remote session on this specific issue of remote meetings. And I know one of the things that was coming up in there was last minute notification that someone can't make it to their meeting, but they would like to attend remotely. And I believe that is next Wednesday, the day after our regular meeting. So I don't know if it's something we want to perhaps look at taking that whatever is gleaned from that and maybe amend later on if we need to insert something for last minute or,
That presentation is a redo of an old presentation, which this information
okay,
is based
all
off
right.
of.
I wasn't sure.
So it's a refresher. The really only loophole about not making the notice and publishing the remote meeting location is this middle paragraph that says, with the exception of members serving in the military or advised by a health professional against public place for personal or family medical reasons. So, and they can be limited up to 3 times a year.
Okay.
So if somebody called and said, I've got this, I've been told I should be staying away from people, we would make that note and the person could attend remotely, up to 3 times a year.
And really, if someone can't attend due to a last minute extenuating circumstance, there would still be a quorum
Yep,
anyway if we're gonna conduct a meeting, so it really
we,
shouldn't.
we
have
take
too
that for
much
granted,
bearing.
but typically that's the first thing that you do is identify that you have a quorum.
So if it's last minute and you're supposed to have it posted for 3 days, then can you get around that?
If you've been advised by a health professional.
Yeah, within the last 3 days?
Within it, like, yes, yesterday somebody gets a diagnosis and says, I've got this and I shouldn't be at the meeting, but I can participate. We could do that up to 3 times a year for each person.
That would be one of our library meetings a couple of years ago. I think we didn't have a quorum for beginning the meeting, so the director, Melissa, she started to call around the different commissioners, hey, we don't have a quorum, can you get online and be in? So that would not be legal then?
That would not be consistent with this rule.
Okay.
So,
And- oh, go
interesting
ahead.
thing I run into in one of the committees I'm on is, it's large, and there's 2 different entities that are both large, like 20 or 25 members. So if you and we meet remotely all the time, so doing a roll call vote on every vote is super cumbersome and takes a lot of time.
But is it a committee or is it an authority? Is that the radio
It's-
board?
Yes. So what they've done is move items to a consent agenda at the end,
Oh, and then take
have
one.
big
Yeah,
vote at the end.
yeah.
You know, that's
That seems to work.
kind of a gray area or not, but it's very helpful in keeping the meetings at
Yeah.
a reasonable length when you have that many people remoting in.
For our discussions, this is about how this board is gonna operate. And I would recommend having a conversation with Stephanie and making sure that, that Heritage would operate in a similar fashion. The technology's available. Whether our board members are versed in using the technology to attend from remotely is another thing. I know Friday I saw the draft of our meeting for the Ambulance Service District Board, and one of their commissioners is remote, and he's gonna be remote for a couple, 3 months out of the year. And whether that is or isn't the intent of serving as a commissioner in northern Minnesota, now with this rule, it's okay. But maybe I'll go down and visit him, because I think he's down in Boca.
So just a note,
Short vacation.
Prime West, if you're not there in person and you can attend remotely, that's great, but you can't vote. That's how they're handling it.
Yeah, and that's one way to do that.
And that's what I did in January when I was gone. Yeah, I just listened in, but
And I've always kind of thought that if you could participate is important, whether you can vote or not. That's where I always thought, like, if I all of a sudden wake up sick on the day of the meeting, I would still like to be able to participate even though I might not be able to vote. At least I can listen, but,
Yeah,
with
you
this
can
new
hear the
technology
discussion,
and all.
yeah.
So is that allowed under the rules then? Just can't vote?
Well, typically, we wouldn't have a Zoom open, and we've got the stream open,
Streaming,
so
yeah.
people can always
Watch. Yeah.
follow along if they're not there.
Yeah.
It it gets a little gray. I think if we make an accommodation for someone to be able to interactively attend the meeting, that we should probably satisfy the conditions of this amendment. And super easy. For us, we've been doing 95%. It just hasn't been, we haven't been following the roll call vote, and there's no way around it until the rule changes.
I remember, maybe it was even Shar before COVID and everything. I think, was it you phoned in one time maybe, or? It seems like one of us commissioners phoned in, because we weren't gonna be around, but we wanted to be part of the meeting. So back in the old days.
That was before we streamed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think all these rules go back to 21.
Okay, yeah.
They made some on-the-fly modifications in 20 relative to COVID. They basically made an exception, for that period of time. And then I think these adjustments to 13D came out in 22. And I still think the bit about the roll call vote could be adjusted, that you could say if you can clearly differentiate who's voting which way. Or if that was a specification, that you need to be able to clearly identify who votes which way, that roll call wouldn't be necessary.
It seems like something, especially a 5-member board, like David was talking about, you get 20-some members, then I could see the need for the roll call. But 5 people and 1 or 2 people are remote,
No biggie.
yeah, we know.
Okay,
Consensus, we'll just put that on do an amendment to the bylaws
yes.
next week.
Okay, on to the capital projects plan list.
So we've got a capital policy, and it's a longer document. And there was not much point in updating that until we get to the point of being ready to approve the new 5-year plan. So what I've given you is some worksheets that I've been working on to kind of combine all of our plans into a single plan. And the first page that you should have or one of the pages you would have would be a listing of the Hubbard County capital assets. But I just show that to note that from our 2021 MCIT valuation to our 2025 valuation, the properties or the building schedule for the county has nearly doubled in value. That's not terribly inconsistent with what we've seen in other markets. But it's interesting, and when I do the review for our scheduling this year, I will be asking some tough questions about that. The law enforcement building went from $15 million to $38 million in value. And I'm not, whereas the courthouse went from 13.5 to 16.5. You could almost see that as being normal, but. And they've got the nursing home listed at, instead of 13, they've got it listed at 25. So, I mean, if we could get that, that'd be great. Right? That argument at the County Board of Appeal, nobody will buy it for that. Because if they would, it might be available.
Yeah.
And is that like replacement cost?
It is definitely a reflection of replacement costs and the higher cost of construction and doing business. And obviously, this is gonna go up after our improvements next year, but I just wanted you to be aware that, we don't have $60 million worth of buildings now. We have $100 million worth of buildings. And that will keep putting pressure on our capital improvement plan and the cost of maintaining the plant of operations, which continues, when we get to the strategic plan, continues to make a really good argument for having a good, strong remote work policy when it makes sense, and we know we can document that people are being successful in that. Because we've already outgrown our facilities, right? And if we don't want to have to build another building, we're gonna want to take care of these, well, with one exception that we kind of have on the docket. But anyway, I wanted to share that one. The debt service schedule has been updated, and I apologize for the small numbers, but it's better to look at it on one page. Basically, you can see that with the two new issuances, that for a couple of years, we're gonna bump up, and then we're gonna come back down a little bit, but roughly the debt for the county facilities is approximately the same that it has been. And then you can see below that is the obligations for the nursing home. And they have one issue that's retiring after 2027, and that will knock down the debt at that facility. We talked about that at the last Heritage meeting, that right now we're in that gap where their debt service requirement is high as it's gonna be in a while. So, the long and the short of it is when we get to the rest of the list and we're looking at things like roofs and mechanical systems and plumbing issues and electrical retrofits and things like that, the more we can plan ahead and, save to do that work or plan to do that work within an operating budget, the less debt we'll have to take out for the buildings. And generally, we're in a pretty good space. The only space where we've got significant question marks is in the solid waste group. And that has a lot to do with what happens with this, with the hub and spoke process. But we probably have more near-term needs there than we do anywhere, as long as a couple of projects go forward.
This is nice to have all this on one page, Jeff, thank you.
Yeah, and these will be all funneled into that whole policy and the background, and you'll see the, and I've gotten the solid waste capital plan, and I have Bobby's for all of this area, or for everything else, and I'm waiting for the plan from the highway department, and then we'll fold that in here. Now, the process will be that in May, we'll set a date for a public hearing, because we have to approve this plan, just like we have to approve the 5-year plan. The reason we want to approve that is when we get to if we get to the point of issuing debt, and we refer back to a capital plan, it's already done. It's not uncommon, and this county has done it before too, to go through the process of approving a quick plan before you issue debt to say that we had a plan. It's actually better, long run, to have a plan in place, and then that informs what you're scheduling and what you're spending money on. If we look at the schedule that addresses, now these are the two working pieces that we're gonna work on over the next couple of months. But my proposal would be that we would have a public hearing in June, and that we would approve the new 5-year plan before we, just as we're starting the next budget year. So we've got 2 months to work through these next 2 pages to make sure that they're where we want them to be, and that we're allocating funds in the right places. So the one that has the gray section, a little bit of gray on it, is the kind of the 5-year plan for economic development and HRA. And you can see we've made a lot of commitment in 2025, and acquiring those parcels is a big portion of that. There's the line of $260,000 for TFL housing parcels. Next week, I'm gonna bring to you, I have had conversations with Vredenberg, who owns the property to the north of the new jail garage, and he is willing to sell, and we'd had conversations about acquiring that as a HRA rental unit, and that would be the plan. He's willing to sell. It solves problems for us. It continues to provide housing. The tenant is not using that garage, which means that We can put Bobby's stuff in that garage when he's displaced here in a couple of weeks and that old garage comes down. So that solves some problems. And then the assumptions relative to when I show industrial development, $1 million a year, and industrial parcel sales, that's of course speculation. That's the point where we recognize that we have to earmark if we get a letter of intent, if we close a deal, if we've got an industrial development going in, that we're gonna have some cost related to making that property work for them. So those are made-up numbers in 26 and 27. They're just highlighting that, that we know if something happens, we're gonna be partners in making that happen. You can, I'm sorry?
Just a quick question about the Vredenberg property here on the corner. If it's going to become an HRA property, are there any parameters that that property has to meet in order to qualify for any HRA programming or anything like that?
Mary's working on that, but I don't think we're gonna do this as a rent-controlled project.
Okay, all right.
We're just gonna do it as an own project, so.
All right.
And Jeff, how come does the tax capacity decrease in Enbridge? We went from 600 to 500.
Well, actually, for the first few years of this plan, I was showing 1.1 for capital and
Yep.
500 for economic development.
Yep.
And I bumped it up in 25 and in
Oh, just
25.
because of this?
Yep, because of these needs. So in 25,
Okay.
we bumped it up, and that was approved in the budget. In 26, I'm showing it bumped up, otherwise it doesn't solve the problem.
Okay, yeah,
So
okay.
the recommendation, 25 is a budgeted year. 26, 27, and future are kind of earmarks, and that's the conversation. Is that the right allocation?
Okay,
I'm still assuming that we're gonna be capturing that $1.6 million. We're not increasing that as tax capacity grows, we're just holding that as a steady value, which means as that tax capacity grows, it's actually now starting to help offset taxes for others. But that's one of the assumptions on here, and these 5-year assumptions are really what this conversation is about, I really have to fix that. And that's really what that is about, so thanks for catching that. The 500 was the number that was in there.
Yes.
I overrode it in 25
Okay.
and overrode it in 26 to solve it.
okay.
You can see that at the top of 25, it says 651, 312. That was the carryover from 24. And then at the bottom, you can see the ending fund balance if all these things happen. And then you can see that that goes to the top of 26 and so on and so forth. So that's kind of showing the float that we have in that fund. Mary will be bringing, we had this conversation at the Public Works meeting on Friday. Mary will be bringing some process and a timeline for the development, the platting, the development, and the sale of the parcels up north. We have had a lot of people express interest. I don't believe we're gonna have a problem in selling those parcels. We do have a process to go through. Part of it is going through the platting process with environmental services. I walked through that with Eric yesterday. Just a consideration, we've asked the question if we were to ever give the planning commission the ability to just make decisions without them having to come back to the board. We have that authority, you have that authority. You haven't wanted to do that to this point. That's gonna add an extra month at least to the process of being able to sell those parcels. Just one minor drawback. Maybe it's maybe it's still good for the overall planning process. But as Eric and I talked about it yesterday, I said we should bring that up again because this is an illustration. If we get the preliminary idea, the deadline to be on the April agenda for planning commission is March 24th, which is gonna be hard to do because we won't have the deeds yet. We can do it in general theory to know that that's coming, but then we wouldn't actually be able to go with a preliminary plat until May. And then it would have to come to the board in June, and then it would be finalized in July. and then we'd have to go through the public process of making those available for sale. September is probably the date that somebody could buy a lot.
So could we do, like give them, I'm just throwing a number out there, criteria of 5 things, and if the seller met those 5 things, could we then give, if we wanted to go down that road, their board the authority to sell, rather than having to come back to our board for that?
Well, the one process is related to the planning commission, and is the planning commission making a recommendation, or are they approving? the body?
And that's what I'm saying, if this board, if it fulfills the 5 criteria that this board sets, whatever that is, could we then authorize them to do that just for those parcels?
I don't think so,
Okay,
because it wouldn't be just parcel specific, it would be whether the planning commission has decision authority or recommendation authority.
so overall, they would have to have the decision authority over everything.
And
Okay.
there have been a couple of instances where that I think has worked really well, that it's come back to the board for the public discussion. And I don't suspect this is a piece of information that's gonna change your mind about that, nor do I think that it should. It's just a point to bring that up, that it's gonna take an extra 30 to 45 days for this process, and if everything goes perfectly, we might be able to sell a lot in September.
I would prefer to follow whatever steps the average person would need to follow, so that it's the same format, all the same timelines. I don't want to see the board circumvent any steps or anything, because it can get viewed in a rather negative way.
I'm not, that's not at all what I'm saying. We're going to follow all the same steps, but in Hubbard County, one step is, in many counties, the planning commission makes decisions, and they don't come back to the board for a final decision. You have the authority to transfer that or not.
There's many that don't, and,
Yep.
and we've had some instances where, I'm glad it came to us because the public wanted people who were elected to be the ones to make that final decision.
Yep.
I would agree with you, Tom.
Specifically on conditional use permits, those are a little more.
And if they didn't like our decision, they would
Regarding
kick
like
us
a
out.
plat, Have we ever not approved a recommendation on a plat?
Well, we've made adjustments.
And,
I think Jeff is just talking
and
about a
I'm-
time frame.
And I'm just
here, the
talking
timeframe
about the
thing.
time frame for
Yeah.
this. I'm not, and I'm saying there's an opportunity and there's a decision the board has made that adds another month to this time frame. I'm not saying that you should change it or even consider changing it, I'm just identifying that's what it's gonna take. And it's gonna take that because we're gonna follow all the steps that everybody else would have to follow in platting this and walking through the process and then making them of it. We actually have to do more due diligence, because if we're gonna sell those parcels, we have to make them publicly available, right?
I was a little bit flabbergasted on that one tract right away. Oh, we can get a variance for 8 lots instead of going to 7 lots. I mean,
No. We could apply for a variance, the same as anybody else could. That was the conversation. If that was your decision that you wanted to make 8 instead of 7 there, we could apply for a variance, the same as anybody else could. We're not saying that we're gonna we're gonna take the short track in any of this. That's really important to know.
I would imagine that in the counties that give their planning commission authority, it's because there's a lot of activity going on a consistent basis all the time that you possibly couldn't keep up with it. I don't know that we're in that position yet, but I could see where at some point in time, if your growth is occurring so rapidly, you don't have a choice. Otherwise, you just get bogged down doing that at all your meetings.
There's 2 reasons that counties might make that choice. One is to speed up the process for the development, and 2 is to actually separate themselves from that body of work. And your determination to this point is you want to be involved in that body of work. Perfectly fine, works well here. Every time we've had a conversation, I think we've had a good conversation. So I'm not saying that, I'm identifying the timeline from here to there.
And I'm just thinking, long-term, would we even have the structures or the guidelines in place to properly guide the planning commission on the 10,000-foot level of the board on regarding developments so that
You
to
have.
do that if you wanted to?
The only 10,000-foot view that you would have is the shoreline ordinance. The ordinances that they do their work by. But it's actually, that's the only 10,000-foot view you have in this current situation. Because when they make a recommendation and you make a decision, you're still making it based on that. The thing that you're doing is you're engaging in an additional public process beyond the public process that they're already required to hold. So I didn't really want to get into that conversation. I just wanted to put that out there, that that's a part of why this takes so long. So the development for the county on these parcels is gonna be, if we start now, 6 months before we can sell something. It's kind of the same process other people have to go through, aside from they don't have to bid on a property, they can just buy it on the market, right? So it's just a little bit different. Nonetheless, those are the assumptions on that page. And then if we go to the last page, which is the same thing, but just for basically the county buildings and other capital items, we've identified capital in the plan as something being over $50,000. Now, we may still budget for, if we're doing mechanical systems and it's a couple $100,000, we could budget those in operating, or we could budget them in capital. But we're gonna probably show them here in the planning phase, so that when we get to the year of assigning, and here you can see that the Enbridge tax capacity in 25 and 26 is $1 million, and 27, 28 is shown as that 1.1, so it's still shown as that amount. 25, we've got, the projects that we've gotten. You can see the starting capital fund improvement balance is 11 million. That's because we issued $10 million in debt last year that we're carrying. We're issuing $2 million in a round number, turned out to be 2,010,000. So that we're carrying $15 million into this project. We have a couple of things that we might still want to do in this year's project list that came up. One is remodel of the lower level break room that shows up as that $30,000. Most of that is plumbing remodel that we've already spent, and some of that is refinishing what that space would look like. You see the other $27,000 for the Nevis shop and parking and paving. The recommendation there is there's an opportunity to do that while 13 is being improved, which is why we might want to do it this year rather than put it off to a future year. And three big numbers I want you to look at. That courts public safety addition for 18 million. That was that placeholder we put out there when we did our first review of all of our facilities. Remember, that would be replacing the old jail with an infill. We've never put that on a timeline. We've never said, yes, that's a project we're gonna do. That's a placeholder. And then down in the middle, it says remodel the old jail for 1.5 million. That's the scope that we're looking at right now. Can we do something to improve the space for probation that it makes it so that they're willing to stay there? And they did just negotiate I told them that we'd be interested in a 1-year extension of their lease with us rather than a multi-year extension of their lease, so that should be coming back to the board fairly soon for them to, you to approve that extension. But I believe that means is they're planning on staying for a year while we look at this. I do have an architect from BKV is going to be here on Wednesday. He's gonna start with Mark, take a tour. We're gonna take a look. Can we do a $250,000 facelift that makes it worthwhile? Do we have to do $1.5 million or $3 million worth of mechanical restructuring to make that space work? Or is the best long-term to abandon that old thing in favor of a new facility? Those will be your decisions to make, and those decisions aren't gonna have to be made in the near term unless it looks like, we can get by with a couple $100,000 and make this a much more usable space. Right now, we know the challenges with that space are we don't really have good, safe transport of prisoners from the jail to the courts. We know we really don't have adequate court spaces. it's a state function, and there's no state funding for that. So we have to be realistic about that. I'm showing those as the things that we have to have that conversation about. The first step of that conversation is BKV is gonna try to flush out those three options for us here over the next couple of months. And all indications is that probation is gonna stay there for another year, which would be until June of next year. Everything else on this list, in the uncategorized list, it's just kind of an idea of how much money we think we're gonna put into it, is basically electrical, plumbing, mechanical, roofing, deferred maintenance. We just have to figure out when it fits in. The one on the bottom, the transit garage for $3.8 million, we're working to get a grant from MnDOT to do that. That would be 95% funded by that grant if we are successful. We applied for that grant last year and didn't quite get it. We're going through the process of improving that application, and it's not uncommon for that to take a couple of times to apply before we would get that. That plan is, of course, to use the lot to the north of the jail here where the water tower is, to put that building there. It would accommodate twice as many stalls as what we have now. Those stalls over there then become storage for the highway department. It solves a couple of problems that way. I'm gonna try to get those preliminary plans to the city just to kind of start doing the background work. This is what this looks like, because their time schedule is, if we get awarded a grant, they expect a completed building within 2 years. They're doing the architecture work, and they're doing the engineering, and they're doing all that in the plan development, which is different than when we're doing our own project. But essentially, that's their building for 20 years. So when they do that, it makes sense. So more to come on that one. I think the application deadline is sometime in the fall, but we'll start working on it again now. And I believe we'll have a good chance of getting that grant, so almost have to treat it as a soon-to-be funded project.
What's up with the elevator?
The elevator's just nearing the end of its life, and the guts kind of have to be redone.
Oh, so that it would just $60,000 to redo the guts?
I believe that's the number that Bobby had, and that number came from the ICS assessment in 2021.
Okay.
So anything that we say, well, these are kind of throw it at the wall and see what sticks numbers, kind of budget numbers, and we program them into a future year, and then we go through and we get better numbers and refine them as we're getting close. But yeah, that's the employee elevator, which is probably 30 years old now.
Oh, that wasn't redone when the building was?
It wasn't redone in
Oh,
2014.
I didn't realize that, okay.
No.
It's rather old.
And I haven't been stuck, but a couple of our employees have been stuck in that elevator for
Really?
periods of time, yes.
Oh, no wonder I take the stairs.
Yeah, so for your information, take the front one or use the stairs, but it's not hazardous. It's getting near the end of its life.
So looking at all of this and kind of comparing it to our debt structure, we really don't have the capacity for any large-scale items until almost 2040, unless we're willing to increase our debt service or
Honestly, I think,
offload something.
yeah, if we were to look at that $18 million project, I would say that would probably be somewhere out to 2035-ish at least, before you could restructure some of this debt and take on that additional. We could model some of those things in the financial plan as we're looking at budgeting, but preliminarily, that assessment is correct. I think we'd probably have to pay half of what we have now, before we would.
Do anything.
We're nowhere near at the debt capacity. We're at the capacity of debt that we want to pay,
Yeah.
right? So so if we're at the point where we're paying approximately $1 million a year in debt service, if we took this on now, we'd be going up to 3. That'd be a big jump. If we wait 5 years to prioritize this project and 5 years to develop it, in 10 years, we could probably do, well, first thing is, the cost of that building won't be $18 million in 10 years, it'll be 30, right? So that is one thing. There's arguments all the way around, but it's really hard to evaluate that until we get this next first report from BKV about what the options are.
Of
The
course,
other
what else
one-
could change that? Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, the other thing about keeping our debt service where it's at, when you look at what might happen with the budget, Hubbard County's in a lot better position than other counties because we've been very conservative. And so if we up our debt by a lot, then that just adds an extra burden.
And I couldn't recommend like moving to $3 million of debt
Right,
service.
I understand you're
Based
not
on,
doing
based on
that.
the levy and the current stuff.
Yeah,
What could change though is obviously with some of the if some of the economic activity
Yeah.
occurs and there's tax capacity growth in the county.
Yep.
And it grows faster than inflation, then 10 years from now, you could be looking at this and maybe you can move to $3 million without any real significant
Or
feeling any differently than you are now.
or in 7 or 8 years, you refinance some of the debt that we
Right.
have, and you do it at like $1.75 million, or you scale that project back. Or we think about the use of this building.
Right.
You know, I mean, there's
other options.
when I'm having him do this bit from here to here, I'm also having him consider how we could make that space accessible. I think we originally talked about if you brought a corridor, a connecting corridor from that building, if you built it, over to the same levels as this, you would solve the access to this building. And then you just have to determine if you want to make it useful for something other than what it's used, than what it is. So, a lot of that stuff, but those are not on here because they're planned expenditures. Those are on here because we're thinking about that $110 million worth of plant and how are we gonna continue to best serve the public and take care of our employees at the same time.
Is this building on the National Register of Historic Places or anything like that? That would limit us what we could do?
Yeah, I think so, but
and
we,
increase costs when we redo it.
Yeah. It's still like the option of using it. I mean, it is an asset that we have. And, but, yeah.
for example, I mean, if we think about the attorney's office. We know we're remodeling for them right now. We also know that that's one of the groups that's probably, if they need one more person, then they're out of space, right? So we're building that for what their current allocated complement is. And one thought was this space would provide attorney's office space, court space, probation space, and that safe passage, which makes sense. But if you decided that you weren't gonna do a second floor over there and you were gonna come over here and use this space, put the attorneys in that space, it's an option. Is it the best option? Is the cheapest office? The cheapest option is probably build a box over there that's 2 stories tall in a basement with elevators on both ends. And this number was 13 million when it was on the plan when we did this in '23. I just bumped it up because I know times have changed. I don't have any basis for that. I didn't even do a square footage calculation, I just put a placeholder in there, so. But that is, we know that from the original plan, and we know that from the strategic planning that we did, that, you know, if to serve courts well, to serve a DUI court, the current spaces that we have are not very efficient for the way the court has to operate. And again, that's a state function that doesn't have any state funding, but it does have a significant impact on outcomes in Hubbard County.
Part of that conversation to think about too is, because, you know, heritage is a big part of our debt. We're 8 years into a finished remodel already. As the market changes and your competitors are upgrading and doing things, you're forced at some point in time to do that. You know, 10 years from now, are you looking at a major remodel again in that facility? if you are, you really need to be thinking strategically, you know, is there a good time to potentially look at selling? Otherwise, you have to invest more. Or if you wait to the point where it's no longer fits the needs of the residents based on new ways of doing things, you're just gonna see your value continue to drop too. So those are all things that weigh into this whole big picture.
We didn't evaluate the major buildings of the nursing center when we did the deferred maintenance schedule. We might want to do that, because I'm guessing we can't wait till 2035 before we make the next significant investment in that property. Which means they're actually in a tougher spot than the county is overall, because they're carrying the same annual debt on $7 or $8 million of operation. That's hard. 12% of their revenues go to debt service.
Yeah, and you really can't deal with using debt service to solve that problem until, 2040.
So when I listened to the HHS
Significantly, yeah.
testimony for HHS committee and the budget cuts, there were 2 or 3 larger nursing home owners from the state of Minnesota that own several facilities, and they all said they're losing money. And so I'm not opposed to thinking about selling Heritage at some point, but in this
Did we have
climate,
we have a 3-year management agreement? We just finished the first?
yeah,
So we're probably months away from having to have a
Right.
conversation about that,
Right.
but it always needs to be in the back of the mind.
yep,
Because that's one thing that we do that we are not obligated to do, but have done in this community for a number of years. But yeah, the Heritage is leveraged at 12 or 13% of their operating budget, their debt, and ours is less than 1%.
and they might not be able to make that this year.
Well, the good news is that we'll just pay it if they don't.
That is the good news.
The good
It's just
news.
something to be
That's
cognizant
the
all the time
reality.
about,
Yeah.
because I don't know when that optimum time is, or if there even is one, or if it's just something you, at some point in time, you just continue to invest in, because it's definitely a needed service, and
The advantage of it being publicly owned is you have the capacity to support it in a situation where the business decision to keep it open or close it would be different. So that's, and truly, that's the test. I mean, public provides the service, goods and services that the market won't, right? We're not competing with business. We're providing things that business wouldn't otherwise do. We're not doing housing because we want to compete with builders. We want to create the circumstances where those builders in the market will pick it up from there. So those are the places where we engage. Otherwise, primarily, we're just doing the stuff in this building and that building and over there. But any elective things that we're doing are not enterprise operations. If we had a privatized solid waste facility here, can you imagine what the fees would be?
oh, yeah.
Because they would have to pay stockholders, they would have to pay everybody those raises. So part of the reason we do it is it's what everybody needs to live and work in this community, in this state. So I'll be getting updates to you as those come out, and cleaning up that plan and putting in the summary plans. We did get a really good summary from Solid Waste. So I'll probably just send that. I'll send you a link so that you can see it while we're working on it. I wanted to get the highway one before I brought the whole thing in here, but we've got 2 months before we need it to be. It's never gonna be complete because it's a document that's constantly changing. But if we can get it 90% complete by May so we can schedule a public hearing, we should have a really good idea of what our 26 capital expenditures are gonna be, and a pretty good idea about the next 3 or 4 years after that, what our recommendations would be. Those will inform, knowing what the 5 to 10 year capital forecast is, has a significant ability to inform next year's operating decisions, meaning the levy. just part of the process. We're gonna spend a little more time on it now that we have that.
Just one more thing about Heritage. So, Mayo had record profits this year. They just came out and said, but a lot of the small rural hospitals are looking at possibly closing. And when you think of the, Heritage is, not only do they give service, but it's an important thing for our community, just community-wide, as our doctors or hospital facilities. And when things like that are taken out of the community, part of the community starts to die. And so there's more than just levy dollars and expenses.
The other thing that could happen too is, if we continue to lose nursing home facilities in the state
Yep.
and across the country, you can see at some point in time, that's gonna be a big problem. And then you could see potentially at some point in time, federal or state government coming along and saying, okay, we need to do something about this, and now you might have grants available to remodel buildings and create new facilities. If the private sector doesn't pick up the ball and run with it, that could very easily happen 10, 15, 20 years from now.
Yeah,
The need isn't going away, it's gonna
No.
get worse.
Yep.
Right.
It's gonna get more.
Hospitals benefit from care facilities, and care facilities benefit from hospitals. If you have one close, it affects the other. So we're not at that point.
No.
And the financials for the last 15 months have been fantastic from Heritage, and that's good. That gives us more options rather than fewer options. But it's just, our last time we looked at that list, I included Heritage, but I didn't include it because they weren't within the scope of that study. But they are assets that the county is responsible for. And I think it's important to know that.
Just one more thing on that. For their value, is that their evaluation on the tax evaluation? Is that their estimated market value? So they're paying their
I had
portion
this-
of tax on that?
I had this conversation with Maria, and she's
Yeah.
gonna check the MCIT value against the appraised
Okay.
value. But
Okay.
MCIT is more concerned with replacement value
Yes.
than they are concerned with market value.
Yep.
So I will answer that question for you, and I'll label it as such when I get that answer.
Thank you.
Ready to move on to the next?
Yes.
The next is, the basic question here is, do we want to just tweak the current strategic plan that we have that was done in 2021? Or is it time to do a new plan? My suggestion is that we tweak the current one that we have, and we put off doing a new plan until we get through this construction project. That's my recommendation, short recommendation. But the conversation about what's on that plan and what our priorities are for the next 2 to 3 years is completely up to you. And I've provided comments on the items in the plan for you to look at, and the ones that I highlighted are the ones that I wanted to make sure that we have a brief conversation about today, or at least know those are the things that we're currently struggling with. So this is the mission, vision, and values adopted in 2021. And, kind of the first question is that still true? Those things shouldn't change that often. But, that this also should drive everything that we do, you as leadership, as boards, and making determinations and setting priorities, and then us as staff and carrying out those priorities should be based on all of that. And I think that based on what a county is supposed to do, I don't think it could vary far from this. You could wordsmith a little bit differently, but I don't think it could change terribly much. We currently have 5 pillars: employee development, economic development, communications, technology, and financial planning. I think those are largely still relevant. I have added a few items in here for us to consider. I don't know that we'd have to formally approve them, but they would be things to be added, would end up coming to the board for action at some point in the future, and I'll point those out in a minute. So the first level bullet points are the action steps under under the plan, and then the second level of bullet is kind of an update on where we are at with that, or whether that is not a priority anymore, or still a priority. And then, as I said, the highlighted ones are the ones I wanted to discuss, but feel free to ask questions about any of them. The first one, and the first thing that was written down as an action step was for the board and the leadership to go through communication styles training. Now, we have been participating at the leadership programming with AMC. Is that still a priority, or are we getting the support we need to work together effectively through the other means that we're participating in? I participated in many leadership style tests, in 2-day workshops or 2 half-day workshops. We've talked about home run leadership. We've talked about, last year it was Dare to Lead at leadership. This year it's going to be a different, they're all variations on a theme, right? But the question is, we haven't done this. Do we want to make that a priority, or are we getting that through our participation and other engagements?
My question in that area would be, we kind of, the way we're doing it now, we're getting it in bits and pieces, with 2 or 3 commissioners going to different events at different times. And maybe that's good enough. Be interesting, your guys' feedback on the value of that. Or would we get more out of doing something as a cohesive unit that's more of a longer-term program?
More of an immersive type of thing.
Yeah, something that's maybe,
You spend time.
maybe you do something twice a year for 3 years, where you're doing this, and maybe you have some homework in between a little bit, but we're all getting the exact same thing, and we're all working together, instead of 2 or 3 of us out Dare. Then now we might have 2 or 3 go to this other one, which is gonna be different than Dare. The underlying principles are still the same, so there's still value in going to these things, but it's just not as cohesive, you know what I mean?
Are you thinking of any specific training at all, or?
Well, I know of some, but some of them are really expensive if you're gonna do the full package, so you really don't, you have to kind of figure out how important it is, and is there enough to be gained by doing it, or are we good doing what we're doing? That's the question I would have, because, we're just kind of buckshotting it a little bit, which is better than doing nothing.
I think that's the question that I'm asking you to have a conversation about is, do we want to get together in a facilitated state as this group, or as the larger group, including the department heads? And if so, how often would you do that? Once a year, twice a year, a facilitated conversation, I think is really helpful. But
even
it's a time and money thing too.
Yeah, right.
Even thinking about the home run, so Dave, Tom, and I have taken that. But you guys have different personality out of those 4 bases than I do. Even just to have a conversation with us in training just about how the differences can bring positive to making the overall decision would be worthwhile than when we were at training and I could identify what you were, Ted, which was a real eye-opener to me about your process. But it would be helpful to have that conversation in training when you're present also.
And I know organizations that have done these things and spent a lot of money on it, and it helps. I don't know that, having to spend a lot of money on a top-tier entity is necessary to accomplish the same thing, but it just would be nice to have a program that's consistent, instead of just buckshotting it or hodgepodge from different trainings to different trainings. Something that's consistent that we can actually dig into a little more and.
The other alternative,
Same thing.
the alternative is that Brian and Gina and I have been working on this Dare to Lead training for the last 8 months, and we could we could just integrate and schedule a lunch and learn with the entire group and do some of that stuff. Or, you know, like I said, this group or we got this group. There's two different, and that would be kind of your preference and choice.
Don't you think that would be really helpful even for the staff as they work together to realize?
Well, and if you think about how many new department managers we
Yeah,
have.
we have a lot.
It's good to get them in a setting where they're doing something different. Thinking about other people within the team rather than just focusing on what's in front of them on a daily basis. So let me think about that and bring some ideas. There are less expensive ways to facilitate something like that. I'm not planning on budgeting $10,000 a year to bring a speaker in to talk to everybody for a couple of days, but
The one thing I really appreciated, partly because the concept was so simple, but it made me see that we all bring something different to the table,
Right.
and that I need what you bring to the table to help me make a good decision.
And I'm not opposed to training like this. I see some of it though, is it more like identifies how you come up with your ideas or stuff like that. But I think, because of my life experiences, that's why I do the things the way I do things, is because of my life experiences and that, and I'm sure that's the same with all of us. And some of this though, if new training or training that maybe, you know, shows some things that might in this one respect be another experience, and may change or may not change the way you think about things or whatever. But like I say, so I'm not really opposed to it, but I kind of agree, I don't want to be spending a lot of dollars.
Yeah, I don't either.
Where I think if we did none of it, we would still get stuff done. It's just whether this process makes the process better.
That's where I'm kind of a process guy, you know, and that's where I thought the home run leadership program kind of hit that mark perfectly, because it's a process. And usually when things go off the rail, it's because you don't follow the process. You skip something, you miss somebody doesn't get their voice heard, and they feel like you just ran right through them. That's when things generally go off the rail. And home run leadership is so simple.
I know.
It's really super simple.
Mhm.
And if bare minimum, it gives you an understanding of different personalities a little bit, but then follow the process. Don't jump a step, or it'll come back to haunt you.
What I like about the home run leadership thing is that, you know, you build on a person's talents and abilities instead of trying to change them. You just, because once you start building on their abilities, then, you know, and you respect each other's opinion, well, then you start getting things done more and working together better.
And if you look at all these different leadership trainings, they all have the same principles basically behind them. They might name them differently, they might present them slightly differently, and they might dive into each area a little more detailed to bring out the nuances of it all more, where the home run leadership was just simple.
And easy to remember.
Easy to remember, easy to apply.
Hi, Rod.
You know, as a bare minimum, that just seems like an easy guideline to follow.
so we'll put something together and bring it forward.
Okay, and I can see, like we were talking with the new department heads and all that, and we've got one new commissioner in one respect. But say if we had, you know, when it was the three of us came on board, you know, we all had been, you know, had our knowledge of how things worked. We were on, a couple of us were on the planning commission, and Shar had already been, of course, a commissioner in that. So yeah, it's like I say, especially if we had 2 or 3 new board members, I think then, yeah, and like I say, all the new department heads and stuff, it would be nice to have something. What that is, I don't know, but, and I like the idea of it, us joining that group of department heads, because then we get to hear them and they get to, and that I think is a big thing, is we get to hear what the department heads are thinking, because they're the ones that are running everyday operations, you know, we're just looking overhead, kind of seeing how.
We haven't been all together since we did the strategic planning in 2021.
Okay.
And I think that it's probably valid, and I think that was helpful for me to see the whole group together.
Yeah.
And that group has changed by 5 or 6 people now.
Yeah. So is
So-
it a yearly thing, or a couple times a year, or every other year, or?
You know what, I'll work with Brian and Gina, and we'll put something together, and I think at least annually, we should have, I know other counties do at least like a leadership retreat, where they just get everybody in a room together, and they talk about whatever, you know, some of the business, some of the strategy, some of the calendar, some of the business, right? But then also then have a conversation where you get to the point of talking about how each other does things differently, and how that's good, right? I mean, I think we've said over and over, having different voices in this room always is good. So, and I'm looking at my calendar, my meeting with OSS is at 10:30, so I'm not gonna rush through this. But I do have to be there to support our staff in that. So feel free to comment on any of this, or provide me some written comments or support. Generally, I think we'll just work this plan, and then planning again in 26, which is only next year, isn't it? And 5 years in between plans is kind of a minimum.
Yeah.
And keep doing the AMC stuff if something comes up that
Uh-huh.
perks our interest, because there's value in that too.
Yep.
Yeah, if nothing else, there's value just in getting together with other
Yeah, right.
commissioners from other counties.
So this next one, reimagine the onboarding process for new employees. I got copies of a book called The Power of Moments that I shared with the department managers, and we've been having a conversation about this. And they tell a strong story about, you know, your onboarding process is a new employee comes in, sits down, goes through paperwork for 3 hours, and then they go to their desk, and then they're on their own. Right? That's, I think every one of us has had that experience at some point in time. But we also, when we look at it, we go, that doesn't make sense, right? So we are at a position where now that UKG, all the programs are fully implemented, the performance management thing is implemented, and we're starting new with that, we have the ability to make sure that we do a better job onboarding employees.
And I think we need to promote perhaps a little bit of overlap in certain positions. Someone comes, we hire someone, they sort of say job shadow the individual they're replacing for a given amount of time, so they can gain the knowledge and experience.
Cross-training.
Yeah, and let them kind of develop into that person that is being replaced or retiring or whatever.
When we have notice, we do that when it makes sense. And yeah, I mean, if we have somebody who's been here for 25 years and we know they're retiring and they have the ability to work alongside somebody to teach them a specific skill set, absolutely. So yeah, there's lots of different things we can do on that end. This one highlights the fact that we've got internships across the organization, and we do them differently for different ways. Our plan is to put a policy together and have that run through HR, because if somebody's here working on a paid internship or not, HR still needs to know about it, right? We're still responsible to and for them when they're in our workplace. So we'll be doing that. I will have an intern coming on this summer who's going to be helping us do a lot of the budget things that are out of this plan that we haven't been able to do, which is gather a bunch of data and present it more to you and to the public, and then we'll build that out in the website and other places, just to make our process much more transparent. It's gonna be kind of fun, because he's gonna be here in May, and he'll be here, you know, close to the point where we have to make the first May through August until September. And that's the development part, and that's the part that I think we can do better, so looking forward to that. I'm just highlighting this as our ongoing relationship with DDA means we're always working on this. At the Personnel Committee, we had a meeting with Tessa from DDA last week, and we just kind of talked about reconfirming where we are with our market, who we compare ourselves to. This being a negotiating year, it's going to be important for us to have that information. We also talked about the possibility of creating and this gets to point that Commissioner Kiernan was making, have some career ladders within our organization. So gives us some flexibility if we hire somebody who's coming from another county with 10 years of experience. We're not gonna start them at a step one, we're gonna start them, you know, in the middle. But instead of just having one position, one social worker position, do we have a social worker one, social worker two, and have credentials that show how they get there? Just to recognize the market and to recognize the experience people bring to the organization. And then this item, review alternative county organizational structures. We've been dealing with opportunities as we've been facing them. I have my first meeting with, to review the preliminary findings from Clifton Larson Allen tomorrow. And then when I get that, I probably will call a different committee, a different meeting of the general government meeting to review those findings and come up with a recommendation to bring before the board relative to staffing. But that's another opportunity that we have to take a look at that. Then there are just generally other things. I mean, I know one of the pieces of feedback I got early here is that having 13 direct reports is too many. What options and alternatives are there? You know, I think St. Louis County and others, they work with deputy administrators who will take a bunch of the work, and then the administrator just has, you know, half or that. In St. Louis County, he has essentially 4 deputies and overly supervises 4 people, and they supervise 4 people. This is gonna be a tough year to do something like that because of budget constraints and the need to be really cognizant of our staffing costs and the staffing numbers. But as employees develop, there's opportunities for them to be promoted to a position like that and take on more than what they're currently doing too. And that's why employee development is important. I talked about the job market and job descriptions and the career ladder piece. And I mentioned that we're using the performance review module in UKG. And I'll tell you this, we've completely changed what our performance review looks like. There are no numbers on it, there are no grades. It is a discussion. There are about 6 or 8 questions that we ask employees to self kind of answer, and then the supervisor will comment on that, and then the intention is for them to have a conversation about that. And a lot of it has to do with, you know, what did you accomplish in the past year? What are you most proud of? What are your goals for next year? Very typical things. And then a couple of harder questions, like, what do you need from me that you're not getting? And I think that that's a really important conversation for supervisors to have with their employees to make sure that they have what they need, that the stuff they're doing, you know, the computers are working, the tools are working, but also that they have the training they need and that they have the support they need, and they know the scope of decisions they're supposed to be making on their own. I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges we have in an organization that's spread out like this, is who has authority to make what recommendations, or make what decisions, and what responsibility do they have to make those decisions. So we've been working that now for about 3 months, I think just before the first of the year. And I'm getting some people that are saying, I don't know how to do this, or I don't like this. And I'm saying, other people saying, this has been great because I get to sit down and have these conversations that I haven't had. So there's some more mentoring and teaching to do with that.
I think it promotes more conversation, from what I've heard.
That's the absolute intent. And I think that building is adopting it really quickly.
There's a little bit of a learning curve, but I think it's a good thing. You know, you get a good back and forth, so you both get feedback from each other and ideas and whatnot.
So will we be using that with your review?
Yep.
Issue?
Sure, we absolutely should.
Yeah.
That's in May, so I'll be getting that out to you, I guess, probably by the end of the month, huh?
Coming out.
This year's flying by.
I have heard comments about the rollouts of like UKG and SharePoint and the hub. Very little information given out or an opportunity to actually kind of get tutored on it. I was just thinking if each department could have someone well-versed in those things, they would be able to just do it in-house, passing that information along helping people out, because there was a lot of confusion and a lot of, I guess I would call it disgust about how things, it was rolled out, no information. What do I do? How do I get there? What's gonna be there? So,
Yeah, there's a planning element to that, and there's a failure to that, because all of that was discussed at department manager meetings, and my expectation is that when people get that, they should take that back and share that with their group.
Yep.
That's.
a lot of people don't deal with change very well.
That notwithstanding, but that's part of my responsibility, is to make sure that people understand what those expectations are and have some feedback based on those expectations. You know, changing a payroll system affects every single person in the organization, and nobody likes change. And we know we facilitated many conversations between a couple of parties, and in the end, they had to agree to disagree and just make a decision and move on. So that was a tough one. But the stuff with the SharePoint is, I will tell you that I had a conversation. I went down to the first floor, and last year, when we moved to SharePoint, IT staff moved all their documentation out to SharePoint, and they didn't use it. They kept using it on the old on-premise servers. And so this year I said, okay, just move it all over there, because I have better access to it when it's there than when it's in the on-premise server, and you need to free up that space. So I moved it over there, and then I went down and I talked to the staff a week before it was gonna happen, and then the day after it happened, I went down there and I showed them how to, now, it's 3 people, really easy to show 3 people how something has changed. Go to their desk, open the file manager, click on the button, hit the sync button, and I said, well, now it's showing up in the same place you're used to, it just looks a little different. And 5 minutes and everybody was fine. So that's, it's harder when you have 80 staff. It's harder when you have people who aren't working with computers all day, like we have in solid waste and like we have over in the highway. But there's still a way to get people used to that. And once they see it, they kind of appreciate it. Communications, I'm gonna kind of breeze through, aside from this one that, starting this year, we're gonna have department heads, we're gonna have this time slot on the radio monthly to give updates, and we're gonna also have corresponding kind of monthly updates that'll come out and go to the newspaper and be shared on social media and on the website. Technology, there's a couple of items. We've made a lot of progress. You know, the things that were on here were to get the new agenda management software. That's done. We've got the new, we're switched over to Office 365. We're working in SharePoint. This master plan for IT is still a developing process. This item up top, looking for a live chat so people can just, I don't know if you guys ever been on a shopping site where you can just, or an insurance site where you click in and a box pops up and says, do you want to chat with an agent? Well, we would have the opportunity to do that. There are a couple of places where it would be helpful, and there's a couple of places where it might be onerous. So I want to have a conversation about that. One of the pieces that I didn't highlight in the employee development is we have the ability to survey staff and mine out specific details like that. But I'm working with Gina to put together a preliminary survey to get a baseline. You know, how happy are people? How well prepared are they? How engaged are they? Just general common metrics that people use for employee engagement surveys. And we're gonna get a smattering of results, and we're gonna get highs and lows. But if we don't ever establish a baseline, we don't ever know how to measure our growth. So it's time to swallow our pride and take that first survey. I'm not quite ready to do the same thing with the public yet, but we're getting closer to, and I will tell you, when people make a general comment on the website, they all come to my desk, and I fan them out to everybody else, and I think that that's really, really good for this point. People are engaging on the website in a really useful way. And there are other ways where we modify how that website is set up so that it makes, if people, in the last week, I've gotten 6 comments that said I need to change my address for my tax statement. Okay, easy enough, I just forward the email. But if I just highlight it on the front page that say, update your address, they would get to that before they got to the bottom to click on the box for a comment. So we can learn from things like that. AI does, we better start learning how to do that too.
So has there been discussion on implementing AI into anything to help with the efficiency?
Not specifically, the conversations we've had about, are the same as the conversation we had before the meeting,
Yeah.
where we use it for content development. I know a lot of people are using it for content development. I've not asked the question about integrating it into some of our technology, but it's a good
'Cause at some
conversation to
point,
have.
as that grows, we probably should have a training and best practices on proper
Yep.
way to use it.
Yep. We'll find some way to build that into the technology section. The economic development is really, this is kind of a summary of the things that have changed. A lot has changed since 2021 in economic development in HRA. And I think you've all been here for most of that. There are two new items that I've put on here that I at some point I'm going to say, are these important to us? And I put them on because I believe they are. This conversation about the chamber and tourism and what that looks like. We've had conversations, we've gone through the process. We haven't really identified, is it a priority that the county should be supporting? What is that? The last conversation, ball's back in Derek's court to bring something to the board again. But tourism affects our economy, and that is something for you to be thinking about when you're tasked with putting taxes on that economy.
I think the important piece there too is, at least for me, and I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but I want to know what the rest of the community thinks. The entire community. Not just the lodging community, but everybody.
And if there's a way to spread the cost instead of just the customers of the resorts and lodging, some of the things I've heard.
Yeah, and then are there other options? And if there are other options to generate that revenue, what do they look like?
Yep.
How would they be done? And then the public would have, its viewpoint on those things would help a lot.
The two simplest things are you can enact the lodging tax, or you could levy for it. Those are the two simplest tools available to the board to fund that if they determine that's something that needs funding.
And to account for about the same amount of money that was projected, what are we talking, like a 1% levy?
Yep.
Yeah, levy would spread it around with everybody.
Yeah. Right, and and I'm not necessarily opposed to that if that would be the route it would go, but the only frustrating part about that is everywhere I go and lodge, I'm paying for their destination marketing, and now I'm paying for ours too. So I'm paying all the way around, where everybody else is taking advantage of me when I go to their market, so.
And the other new one, and then we've had this conversation, so this is not a new item, but it wasn't on the plan, and I thought it should be on the plan, to identify TFL parcels for sale and development and identify privately owned parcels that would be better managed, right? If we've got those 20s and those 40s in the middle of 600 acres that we're managing that create an inconvenience, if there was ever an opportunity for us to acquire those parcels, it would make sense. And we've generally had this conversation before. Specifically, we've had it about, the 3M property, the Boulder Lake property, the northern parcels. But, Corey has given me a list, and we're gonna work that through, and, if he says he's got this many millions of dollars of TFL we could sell off, well, that makes sense, but if that's also funding for our park, we don't do it 1 year. We would spread it out over a period of time. So we'll be working with that and bringing it forward, but I think it makes sense to actually put it on the plan. And then financial planning, I think I've talked a little bit about what we're doing. Well, we just went through the capital planning, so it was created in 2023, and it calls for an updated 5-year plan. We did the financial management plan last year, so with the help of the intern, we're gonna integrate the capital plan and the financial plan in the information you and the public have related to budgeting for 2026. I think that's gonna be really good. That is the last page.
And you made it.
I did. I apologize for rushing through. I thought we had more time than that, but I really do need to be at the meeting with the OSS to support Marie and Skylar in this point. But if you have comments about any of these individual ones, I'd love to hear them. Otherwise, I'll add those 2 items, put some thought and energy into how we get together as a leadership group intentionally, a couple, 1 or 2 times a year to make sure that we get together and have those strategic conversations. We'll work this plan until we get through this project.
Okay. Anything else? Right? Motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
Second.
Right, we now are adjourned.